Hey guys, welcome back to class. Today we are in section 3 of the Baking Fundamentals course. Now today I want to review with you all of the most common baking techniques and terminology that you will see in recipes. Now when I was first starting to learn how to bake, I would often come across techniques and terminologies and recipes that I would have no idea what they meant. So for instance, I would be reading a biscuit recipe and it would tell me to cut the fat into the flour. And I had never baked before. I had no idea what this meant. So I would get online, I would Google it, I would find pictures and try and figure out what this should look like, how I'm supposed to do it. And then I would get to that information, but I wouldn't quite still understand why we were doing it. What was the purpose of cutting the fat into the flour? Now, I don't know about you, but understanding the purpose for me is really what helped me become a confident baker and really feel like I could tackle recipes in a confident way. So today I want to review all of the most common baking techniques and terminology, talk about how you do them and why you do them. So this video is going to give you some really quick demonstrations of all of the terminology we're reviewing today, but I really want to make sure that you don't skip over the written part of this lesson because the written lesson is going to go much more in depth about each technique and terminology so that you really have a good, clear understanding of it. If you aren't already enrolled in this course, there's a link down below for you to go ahead and enroll. You'll be just a little bit behind the rest of the class, but you can enroll at any time. So if you aren't already enrolled, make sure you do that. So let's go ahead and dive into the lesson and learn all of the most common baking techniques and terminology.
A batter is an unbaked mixture that is thin enough to pour or scoop, but it cannot be rolled out like a dough. Some examples of baked goods made with batters are muffins, cakes, and brownies. When sugar is heated, it becomes liquid and then eventually begins turning brown in color. This process is called caramelization. Caramelized sugar is much more complex in flavor and also becomes less sweet than pure sugar. Sugar is caramelized for making sugar decorations as well as for dessert sauces and candies. When a baking recipe instructs you to cream together, it is referring to when room temperature butter or other solid fat is beaten together with sugar. The process of beating the two together forms a web of air between the fat and sugar, which lightens and leavens baked goods. Fat and sugar are creamed together for cookies, butter cakes, and for buttercream frosting. Cutting in fat refers to when pieces of cold fat are worked into flour with a tool called a pastry cutter or pastry blender. This process coats the flour and also evenly disperses small pieces of fat throughout the dough, which will melt in the oven, creating pockets of steam and flakiness. Fat is cut into flour when making baked goods with a flaky texture, such as for biscuits, scones, and pie crusts. Crimping refers to folding or pinching the edges of a dough in a decorative way to finish the edge of a pie crust or tart. It also serves to seal two pieces of dough together to prevent filling from leaking in pastries like ham pies or calzones. A pie or tart crust is docked by pricking it all over with a fork to allow steam to exit while the crust is baked. This helps to prevent crust from puffing up and shrinking while they are baking. A dough is a thick, unbaked mixture that is much thicker than a batter. A dough can be rolled out or shaped by hand. Baked goods made with doughs include yeast bread, biscuits, scones, cookies, pie, and tart crusts. An emulsion is a forced mixture of two ingredients that are normally unmixable, for instance, fat and water. When an emulsion is created, particles from the two substances are suspended within each other instead of quickly separating. An example of creating an emulsion in baking is when making ganache, which is a mixture of cream and chocolate. In baking, fermentation refers to the process of yeast feeding on sugars and starches present in yeast dough. After a yeast bread is kneaded, it is allowed to rest and ferment. As the yeast feeds, it produces ethanol and carbon dioxide, which make the dough rise. This process is also what develops the distinctive flavor of yeast bread. Folding is a technique used to incorporate two mixtures together in a very delicate way to reduce gluten development and also to prevent whipped egg whites or whipped cream from deflating. When folding, the delicate mixture should be added into the heavier mixture. Use a spatula to cut down through the two mixtures to the bottom of the bowl, bringing the ingredients from the bottom up to the top. Turn the bowl 90 degrees and continue with this motion until the ingredients are fully incorporated. When the proteins found in wheat flour are hydrated, they bond together, forming what is called gluten. Gluten is responsible for the elastic texture of dough. Kneading is the process where dough is worked together in order to align the gluten strands, building strength and elasticity in the dough. This process is most commonly used when making yeast bread. Kneading can be done by hand or with a dough hook in a stand mixer. In baking, the word leaven refers to the process of a baked good rising. Leaveners include baking powder, baking soda, and yeast. Forced leavening can also occur by whipping air into ingredients. In baking, peaks refer to the stiffness of whipped cream or whipped egg whites. As cream or egg whites are whipped, more air is incorporated into the mixture and it becomes thicker. Soft peaks barely hold their shape. Medium peaks hold their shape but curl over at the tip. And stiff peaks stand up straight and do not curl over. Proofing refers to the final rise a yeast dough goes through before it is going to be baked. Scoring refers to shallow cuts made on unbaked dough to control where bread dough will split, as well as to release steam out of filled pastries. Sifting is a process of forcing flour and other dry ingredients through fine mesh to break up any lumps and aerate the ingredients. Sifted flour is much lighter and incorporates more easily. When a recipe calls for butter to be softened, the butter should be at a cool room temperature. The texture should be soft and easily malleable, but there should not be any hints of it starting to melt.
That is it for today for all of the most common baking techniques and terminologies. I hope you found that helpful, and if there's any words that we missed that you're curious about, you can go ahead and post that in the comments. I'll try and clear that up for you. You can also ask it in our private Facebook group. If you aren't already a member of the private Facebook group, there's a link below for you to go ahead and request access to join that group. And after each lesson, we are continuing the conversation over there, so you definitely don't want to miss out on that. Okay, so now for your homework for today. I'd really love to hear from you. What is the most exciting thing you have learned about baking so far? It can be from this course or something you've learned on your own. So I'll share with you mine now. So I remember the day I first discovered what gluten truly was. You know, gluten is a word you hear thrown around so much, but I remember the day that I discovered that gluten had to do with proteins found in flour and how the strands align and strengthen and build elasticity once you work them. And that just really started clicking for me. I really started understanding how gluten was important in baking, to control it, to keep it under control, but then also to really develop it in certain circumstances. So I'm a little bit of a geek. Things like that get me really excited. So I'd love to know what the most interesting or exciting thing you've learned about baking is so far. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.